So today I'm going to be talking about my findings on vampires. Specifically for my paper in PowerPoint, I focused on the history and diseases associated with vampires. And I picked vampires because I didn't know much about the history on them, and I thought it would be interesting to kind of find out more about where they came from and the different beliefs associated with vampires. I also found that the discussion we did on vampires was very interesting, and I wanted to go more in depth with it. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the characteristics of a vampire. And the first one is probably the most known characteristic, and that's that they suck the blood of the living. Vampires use their fangs and pierce the victim, and then they begin to suck the blood. And they're also immortal, meaning that they don't die. But even though they don't die, they still have some weaknesses associated with them. So one of those would be direct sunlight. We all know that vampires can't be in direct sunlight, and that makes it more weak. And the other one that I always found interesting was the garlic weakness. And there's many theories that go along with this that I found, and that's one of them is that the smell of garlic is really strong, and so they're scared of that. But the other theory that I find more acceptable is that it's a strong antibiotic, and since antibiotics treats infections, they aren't able to go near it because they don't want to go away with their infection. And also they can also transform into other creatures, and they could transform into a bat or even a wolf. And they're also known to be very sexual creatures, and they seduce their victims before they suck their blood. So one of the most famous and one of the first vampires was and still is well known is Dracula. It's believed that Dracula was based on a real person, and his name was Vlad Tepes. He was a Romanian prince, and he's known as a very brutal, cruel leader. And he's known for that because he would kill his enemies by piercing them onto a wind stake. And it's also said that he liked to dine with his dying victims, and even dip his food into their blood. And we don't actually know if this is true, but Dracula has many of the same characteristics that this guy did. So some of those would be that Count Dracula was also from Transylvania and sucked his victim's blood, and he could be killed the same way that Vlad would kill his enemies. And this belief that he was a very cruel person is not said by everybody, especially those in Romania, where he's from. He's actually viewed as a national hero who defended his empire from the Ottoman Turks. Another early vampire that I have personally never heard of was Lamashtu, and this was a demon goddess who preyed on humans. From my research, I found that she would creep into a house at night and steal or kill babies, either from their cribs or even in their womb. She wouldn't just prey on babies, though. She would also suck the blood of young men and bring them diseases and make them sterile. And it's said that Mesopotamian women are so afraid of this demon goddess is that they would wear clothing that shows a person named Pazuzu, and she defeated her, and Lamashtu feared her. Lilith is also an early known vampire in the Jewish texts, and she's known as the child killer. She would come in during the night and steal infants or fetuses from the wound, and she also had seductive qualities, which vampires use a lot of the time to seduce their prey as well, as I talked about earlier. Greeks also had some fears from vampires. They feared a demoness called Lamia, and she had a human head and a torso, but her lower body was the form of a snake, and there's a picture of that in the PowerPoint. And she was one of Zeus's lovers, and his wife made her so insane that she vowed to eat all of her children, and she did, and then once she did that, she began to suck the blood of other children because she was jealous of other young mothers. In Asia, the history of vampires comes from Rakshasa, and these characters were able to shapeshift and prey on children. And also Vitalia was another one that would possess recently dead bodies to torture those still living. And so today there's still no way of telling if vampires do actually exist, but there are medical conditions that have some of the same behaviors and appearances. And one of these is porphyria, and this is a medical condition, and their symptoms are they're sensitive to light, have small delirium, and extreme abdominal pain. And in order to cure it, said back in the day they would drink blood, and that would correct the imbalance in their system. And another one is catalepsy, and that's another condition. And they, like epilepsy, they suffer from episodes, and during their episodes they can become stiff, and their heart rate may slow down. And in the past, they may have been mistaken as a corpse. So basically, from my research, I found that there are plenty of vampires in history that aren't talked about, like Dracula, and they're very famous in other countries. And there's a very broad history, and everyone has their own descriptions on vampires.